You're very welcome to this mental health and sport webinar, Sport and Lessons for Life. It's the first one we've done with this in conjunction with Eire GAA here in Malaysia and the Asian County Board. Just to introduce you to the people you can see here on screen with myself. Firstly, we have Brid. Brid's former Cork footballer, won 11 All-Irelands with Cork, and now she's based out in Sydney in Australia. She plays Australian rules with the Greater Western Sydney Giants, bit of a mouthful, but she's the first year out there. We also have Ciaran Casey, a Dublin senior footballer, wrote a book called Dark Blue. Some of you may have seen him on the Late the last couple of months. He's going to have a talk about his sort of mental health journey, and that book is fairly compelling. Also we have Lynch, who's down in Adelaide in Australia, and Chris works with the Australian cyclists in athlete support role and athlete engagement wellbeing. So he'll fill us in, and he's also a former Antrim footballer. Also we have Pat Gorham, who is the chairman of Eire. He'll be given the welcome now in a moment, and Joe Trolan from the Asian County Board, and many of you would have known Joe here in the region with the clubs. So Pat, if we could just hand over to you then to give us the welcome there.
Yeah, hello everyone. Sorry, I'm a bit technology challenged and somehow I can't get my camera working. But welcome to the Mental Health and Wellbeing webinar organised by Ciaran and Joe. My name is Pat Gorham. I'm chairman for Eire here in Kuala Lumpur. Thank you to everyone who's joined us here today, and a special thanks to our guest speakers, Brid down in Sydney, Shane back home in Dublin, and Chris in Adelaide. I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Ciaran and Joe for pulling all this together. The last 14 months has taught us all how important mental health and well-being is to everyone, and we really appreciate you putting this on. I think we're all looking forward to hearing from Ciaran, Brid, Shane and Chris speak more about the importance sport has to maintaining the balance and well-being, and I suppose in particular during times like these when it has shown how important it is. So if I can hand it back to Ciaran there, and we'll get a start on.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Cheers. Yeah, I suppose just quickly over to you, Joe, just for a bit from the Asian County Board and the games development side. Yeah, sorry, I just unmute you there, Joe. Just your mic there, Joe. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah. Most people don't want to hear from me anyway. They've heard from me too many times. But again, I want to thank Brid, Shane, and Chris for being here. It's good. Over this past year, myself and Ciaran and a few others have gotten together to try and help organise a structure for mental health and well-being in Asia. We've done a little bit of work, but I think this past year has shown us that work is very necessary. I was on a call last week with the World GAA, and we're now making a major push worldwide on well-being, health and well-being. And it will be led by Asia as chairing the group that's going to look at mental health and well-being. So we're going to try and push for our clubs like a two-pronged approach. We're going to look at mental health, and we're going to look at our regular health and wellness. We're going to try and fund. We're going to try and make it that, the GAA is a sense of community. It's a sense of family. When you're moving overseas, it can be difficult. When you move overseas in times of strife, it's even harder. So we want to be that first point of call for those people who are moving overseas, that they're not alone, they have somebody here. So over the next year, we have a lot of aims, a lot of goals we want to achieve. And thank you guys. I think this tonight will be a massive springboard for ourselves to push forward with our goals of a stronger program for mental health and well-being. So thank you guys for being here, and thank everybody for joining in.
Brilliant. Thank you, Joe. Cheers. Okay, well, I suppose just to give people tuning in tonight an idea of format. So I'm going to spend 10 minutes interviewing each guest, and then at the end, leaving as much time as we can, 15-20 minutes for Q&A. So during the course of discussion, if you want to put any questions you have in the chat box or Q&A, depending on which region you're in, we'd be delighted to have them, because we want it to be as interactive as possible. Brid, if I might start with you. I suppose it's been a whirlwind sort of couple of months with you moving down to Oz. I suppose, can you maybe just give a bit of an insight to people how that sort of works and relocating there to Sydney?
Yeah, so hi to everyone. Good to see you, Joe. Haven't seen you since the last Asian Games, I suppose, which was a great, I suppose, a great occasion. And it was actually gas. You were talking about people, you know, coming from abroad. And I remember in the last Asian Games, I met, you know, 2 girls from home. One was from Kuala Lumpur, one over playing with Singapore. Neither had played when we were in secondary school, and just goes to show, you know, how far-reaching GAA is when you know, when you move that far away. It's just a great sense of home. So just well done to Joe on all their great work. I suppose, yeah, I suppose I'm a teacher. I'm a PE and maths teacher. I was very fortunate to be part of a very successful Cork senior team for well over a decade. And yeah, we had absolutely phenomenal days, and I suppose there was a lot of learning done over a good 15-year period with Cork. I stepped away then, and I suppose we set up a business, myself, my husband, and his 2 brothers, and we set up a business called My Core Supplements. So it's sports supplements, health supplements, and gym equipment. So I actually took a career break from school and went into that for a year. Then I actually we were very fortunate. We were blessed with a little boy. So I took my maternity leave, and I suppose I got the phone call, I suppose, during my maternity leave if I would consider coming over to the GWS Giants. I had been in contact with Alan O'Connell, the head coach, I suppose, 2 years previous, and he had asked me if I was in a position to come over. I wasn't at those times. One, I suppose I was trying to help out with the business, and I had just retired from Cork football, and the second then was I was very eager to start a family. So when he contacted me during my maternity leave, I suppose, look, the first thing that was in my head was, I'm too old, I'm not able, you know, this has gone past me now, you know, get used and enjoy the middle-aged Brid and just, you know, relax a bit. And I suppose, look, thankfully I had good people around me. I still had a lot of determination in me. I was very, very eager to try out a professional sport and see all that entailed. I suppose, given that I had a long career at Cork, I never did any extensive travelling. I suppose the furthest I ever went was a week or 2. So I was looking, I suppose, look, it was a phenomenal opportunity and too good to pass up. So yeah, we made the move in December, had to quarantine, and I suppose, just given the way that things were over here, when we landed in Sydney, Sydney had a spike of 1 or 2 small cases. So it actually meant that we had to go on a training hub with the team. So we had to hub in regional New South Wales, and we had to hub in Adelaide before we finally got back to Sydney in January. And then it was just steamroll into the championship. So it's been a fair whirlwind. I suppose, yeah, look, unfortunately, after, I suppose, we had done our 2 weeks of hubbing, and we had started a week hubbing in Adelaide. We played our first practice game versus Adelaide. So look, I was due to be out in Australia since November. It didn't work out that way. I probably started my first collective training with the team kind of start of January, and you know, tried to take in and learn as much as I could. And then look, just very unfortunate to have suffered a neck fracture in that first game, you know, that first test match versus Adelaide. So that neck fracture and nerve kind of damage ruled me out effectively for what is a very short season over here. It's run out over 9 weeks. Just given, I suppose, they're given that timeline in between kind of the AFL, which is obviously a longer season, and I think there's golf or tennis before it as well. So it's all governed by TV, so they have that 9 weeks to kind of get it done. And I suppose, yeah, if I was at home, I could definitely have seen myself getting back. You probably have a more extensive championship, but here it's run off very, very fast. So I was in a real, I suppose, race against time.
Yeah, and I suppose just a lot of people, I'd say, Brid, wouldn't be aware of like how serious the injury was. Like that, you know, you had literally got there, and it could be, you know, potentially, you know, career ending in terms of, you know, the football, and you'd only got there. How did you manage that with the well-being and sort of looking after yourself with that big hit? Like,
yeah, so yeah, I suppose, look, I've been very fortunate in my playing career. I haven't ever suffered an extensive injury. I've never been ruled out for longer than maybe a couple of weeks if I think I had a hamstring strain that kind of caught me a couple of times, all right, in the latter stages of my career. So I suppose I've never had to have that setback. I've never had to be kind of, you know, sat down or made lie down really for as long as I had to. So that was, I suppose, that was something that I really needed to get used to and adapt to. And I suppose I have massive respect for a lot of my teammates with Cork. A lot of those that suffered you know, cruciate knee injuries. I suppose I never, maybe I was a bit naive to it, but I never really took stock of what a lonely road it can be. So it was very, very important, I think, for me to surround myself with extremely good people. And I suppose I was very, very fortunate while I was very far away from mum and dad and my sister and my brother. You know, I was so fortunate that I had my husband and my son with me, and, you know, to have someone like Cora Staunton as well, who I have known for years in the club, was just phenomenal. And I suppose the other thing was that we were in a hub situation when it happened. So I was effectively never left on my own for longer than 10 minutes. And there were people constantly bursting in the door, go, right, we're taking the small fella off for an hour. You go for a sleep or go for a shower or whatever I needed to do. So I really, really was wrapped up in a real blanket of love by the Giants. But it was a lot mentally, I suppose, to take. And I definitely, you know, set out a few targets for myself very, very early on. I definitely set out that it was so important to set small steps and to make sure that I was doing the small steps really, really to the letter of the law. And, you know, by doing that, then, you know, the bigger picture, you know, kept coming closer and closer into sight. But definitely the importance of having good people around me and setting myself, you know, small tasks and making sure that I achieve them every single day. And then I set weekly ones, but I never set ones that were too far away from me because I couldn't work that far. I'd only just get frustrated. So that's what worked for me. And yeah.
No, it's great to hear as well that you had that sort of social support and maybe that team environment there in with the Aussie rules. But like, say for example, Brid, when you talk about, you know, the Cork experience and then going to semi-professional football in Australia, what did you notice those transitions were different, apart from like the skill set? But like, what was the difference between an elite inter-county setup in Ireland and then to go to an elite setup in Australia?
Yeah, from a wellbeing point of view, I suppose the biggest thing is that you know, each club is mandated here to have access to a psychologist. On the men's side of things, I suppose it's full-time access, whereas it's part-time access on the women's side of things. So with the Giants, you know, if I felt I needed to, I had, you know, access to their head psychologist, Darren, you know, whenever I needed it. Also, I suppose even like the day after I got injured, I got a phone call from the AFLW PA, which is basically the equivalent of the GPA. So it's the Players Association over here. And basically they have full-time 24-hour access to psychologists. So if I needed to speak to someone, you know, that day, if I needed to speak to someone, even if I was based in Adelaide, which I was at the time, they would make sure that I was in a position to hook me up with whoever I felt I most comfortable with. I suppose the biggest thing was maybe that because I had such a long career at Cork, and look, there were plenty of ups and downs. I know probably the ups are highlighted more than anything else, but there was, you know, plenty testing times with that Cork team. I suppose I had developed a lot of resilience over the years. I was probably a bit longer in the tooth as well. I had a very, very good support system around me. So I just felt confident in myself that I would never allow myself get too low, and ultimately that I would never, I suppose, get too high. And that's probably the way I've always dealt with things in sport. I never let myself get too low with the losses, and I never let myself get too high with the wins. And yeah, I felt that was definitely a help over here.
Great. And just when you talk about the resilience piece, like the, you know, the 11 All-Irelands with Cork, like in any sport, is phenomenal. But just, I suppose, what was the drive that kept you coming back to keep achieving that? You know, maybe like a double or, you know, the treble for a team is huge, but like to go for that many, like what made you want to keep coming back? Like,
yeah, so look, Eamon Ryan came on board in 2004, and up to 2004 Cork had never won an All-Ireland. They'd never even contested a Munster final, they had contested Munster final, but, you know, would have never gotten across the line at Munster final stage, and at that stage it was straight knockout, there was no backdoor. So him coming in was absolutely huge for the Cork Ladies footballers. he wasn't just a coach, he wasn't just, you know, a phenomenal man, he was a psychologist to every single one of us. So when you talk about wellbeing with Cork, like we had a hands-on psychologist there with us, you know, 24 hours a day. He was just a remarkable man, and he had a very, very unique way in getting the best out of people. He was very calm, very calculated, but always would kind of, you know, get the best out of us by telling us a story, you know, of something that could happen maybe in, like, example, Malaysia. Something could happen in Malaysia, but he'll relate it back to us, you know, turning it in and making sure that we got the best out of ourselves. But with that Cork team, him coming on board was absolutely vital. He treated us like adults from the day, I suppose, we went in the door. And I won my first All-Ireland when I was 18. And, you know, when I look back now and I look at some of the 18-year-olds, you know, that I might have dealt with in school, you know, you're still very, very, very young. But he gave us massive ownership and massive responsibility from the second we walked in the door. And I suppose when you talk about well-being, you know, Eamon came to us having just recovered from a cancer diagnosis hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, sorry, I just got thrown off you there. Like he just came off the back of a cancer diagnosis, and I suppose his big thing was, we all have troubles, we all have baggage, and just try to leave it at the door if we can, and enjoy playing football for an hour. And I suppose the massive release that we all got from sport, and I suppose for me in particular, team sport, I thrived in a team setting, and I thrived off other people's energy. And yeah, that resilience, I suppose, you know, even that first year we won our All-Ireland, and geez, we went absolutely buck wild. There was plenty of floors needed changing in Cork, you know, that year. But, you know, you needed to enjoy it too. And he always stressed that, like, it's brilliant having the wins, but by God, you have to enjoy them. And that's, you know, what made it all the sweeter. And the second year, you know, he said, you know, yeah, look, you're a good team, but if you win back to back, like, you'll be a really great team. And, you know, he kept, you know, I suppose without us even knowing it, like, you know, he'd always kind of turned the screw a little bit, like, and I remember him pulling me aside even in 2007, and you know, he was like, oh, you know, Brid, no, like, you know, you're going really well, you're really, really fit, but, you know, sometimes, like, you know, your kicking lets you down a small little bit, so when you get far enough up the field, make sure you hand pass over the bar. And I was like, Jesus Christ, I was just getting like ticked, like, you know, that he was telling me this. So, like, you know, his psychology was like really, really getting to all of us. Sure, I was out every single day of the week kicking ball, making sure I was the best kicker in the team. Like, that was just the way he was. He just got the best out of absolutely every single person. So, like, you know, that resilience, he built that from a very, very younger age. And then as it went up the line, you know, he was like, lads, you're the ones that's controlling everything on the field. You're the ones that are getting us across the line. And I suppose even the way he dealt with his team talks at halftime, it was very much player governed. He kind of just did his small little spiel at the end. And I suppose that's just a massive testament to the man. He gave us massive ownership. He was a headmaster by trade himself, and you knew it. He was very much about putting the power in the players' hands, and, you know, it reaped rewards for him.
That's great. That's great. And yeah, maybe just finishing up on this point for now, Brid, like, what would be sort of your, say, top three takeaways, like, for people tuning in? Because I suppose we have people from all different industries and backgrounds. In terms of the well-being piece, like, what sort of three things do you find that work quite well for you?
I suppose the three things. The first thing was, for me, maybe after getting injured, was setting small, you know, daily goals for myself, weekly goals if needed, and making sure that I was doing the small things right, so that the bigger things, you know, came closer into view. And I think very much so, when I was injured, I realized I can still have a massive role in this team. I think that's massive for people to understand. If you are injured, it lies with you to be proactive and to put yourself in a position where you're going to be of benefit to those around you. If it is, you know, chatting to someone that maybe, you know, is maybe injured also. I found that very, very, very beneficial, chatting to someone that may be in the same position that I was. And yeah, I just found that was really, really important, and making sure I stayed in the mix and making sure that I kept my energy levels up, and it kept me motivated by making sure that I stayed in the mix with the team. And like the importance of being involved in a team sport, I just can't even comprehend, I suppose, now not being involved in a team sport. You know, getting injured in an individual sport must be probably the loneliest place in the world. So for me, getting injured in a team sport, while it was still lonely, I had so many support systems around me, and I had constant boosters that kept me striving, kept me going, kept me determined, and just a massive sense of belonging. And I suppose I've never lost that drive and the determination that I get from my teammates, and I suppose the respect and the discipline that comes with team sport. And I think that discipline definitely served me a lot when I was going through my rehab. So yeah, I've a lot to be thankful for being involved in sport. So the biggest thing was probably just to get out of my own way and to put myself in a position to get out to Australia. And I suppose that in itself was a massive thing for me to say that it's not, that I'm not too old, and just to keep I suppose keep pushing on and keep striving. Yeah.
Brilliant. That's great. Thanks, Rita. Yeah, some of you can probably hear the call to prayer in the background, but that's culturally Malaysia, so that's just a local here. In terms of maybe just switching gears and Shane, to yourself, I suppose with the book, just straight off the bat, like, what was your motivation in writing the book?
I guess it was sprung upon me, to be honest with you. My first kind of port of call when I came back, I was taking a year out. I just finished my undergraduate degree in sports science at DCU, and I was planning to take a year out. And of course, I knew I was going to be busy with football, but I wanted to busy myself with something else, and something else that meant something to me, which was mental health. And I'd written a blog, which is basically the skeleton of what my book is now. And it had taken off so much that the O'Brien Press had approached me a couple of months later to ask me, would I be interested in writing a book? And I remember them asking me, like, to be honest, I wouldn't be the most studious in school, and I'd laugh and a joke with my English teacher then, since the release of the book, saying, look what I've done now, sir, that type of thing, But I think the motivation for me was very simply put is to save a life. I believe my story, when I was back in St. Pat's, I'd even the thought process of, when I was getting a bit of clarity, that I never would wish this on my worst enemy. I got to the depths of despair, so much so, I got into the point of suicidal ideation. And those 2 years that I went through, a hugely difficult period, I'd never wish on my worst enemy. So I wanted to kind of get my story out there in a wider context, and that just so happened to be through the O'Brien Press, through the book. So it's been fantastic. It's been a whirlwind of the last number of months with the book, but hugely grateful that I got that opportunity, I suppose.
Great stuff. Great stuff. I suppose I've been looking through the book there, Jane, and I suppose one thing that stands out, maybe that people can maybe relate to, is probably the stories. Is it around the 21 final, under 21 final, Leinster final? And could you give us an idea of sort of that story?
Yeah, so that would have been an accumulation of coming toward the latter end of, as I said, there was a 2-year period where no one was none the wiser with what was going on with me. I kept up that mask, kept up that poker face, and a number of kind of months had transpired with these suicidal ideations. And I had still a very, very busy period between the Dublin senior footballers and then the under 21 Leinster final, as we spoke about. And it was the Wednesday morning, my mum came into me in the sitting room with the bowl of porridge, because at 19 years of age, apparently I couldn't make my own porridge. But nevertheless, she had met me in a flood of tears, and it was the first time that she had seen me in such a way. And they'd later admitted that they thought they'd seen these cracks for a number of months, but it was the first time that they'd seen me physically crying. And she'd sat by my side for a couple of hours as I wept, and she said, look, I need to distract you before the game this evening. So she'd actually contact my middle sister, Mairead, who was off on that day, and Mairead's bright idea to this day, I don't know why, to distract me, was to bring me up the hills of Howth on a 2-hour cliff walk. And I'm sure everyone listening in, it's absolutely not the most idyllic thing to be doing before a big Leinster final game. But nevertheless, again, it was just knowing that I had that listening ear, that listening shoulder. And, along this walk, I didn't speak a whole lot, but it was just knowing that she was right by my side. And I come back into the car, and it was the first time that I was facing up to maybe not even football could be my crutch, my outlet at the stage. I had Desi Farrell, my manager at the time, from pushing button away to say, look, I can't go through with this Leinster final. I'm in such a bad way here, but I never went through with that phone call. So I went off, I got my gear bag ready, met the lads in the team hotel, and I think I'd maybe half a sip of water, and that was it. I didn't eat anything for the whole day. I had half a sip of water, and that was it. Arrived to the ground, prepared for the match as I always did. And to this day, I'd most definitely say it was the most satisfying 60 minutes of football I've ever played in my life. I was like a kid in a playground again. I remember even 2 or 3 minutes left to go in the game where I think we're 4 or 5 points up, and I'm looking to the ref, and you're probably thinking, I'm telling him to blow the whistle. I was thinking the exact opposite. I was thinking, I don't want to get off this pitch here. I'm in heaven. But inevitably, obviously, he did. He blew the whistle. We were victorious in the game. and I was actually awarded man of the match. And little did people know, as I'm going up on top of the steps to collect my man of the match award, this idyllic figure living this great life, little did they know what was going on for me only 12 hours previous in a flood of tears, my mum, you know. So that was certainly the kind of two lives that I was living. The outside looking in, this idyllic figure living this great life, but internally, I was at the worst point of my life at that stage.
Mm-hmm. And also in the book, you mentioned a trip over to Sweden. Was it to visit your sister? And like, was that, Shane, when you sort of realised that you couldn't keep up that, as you described, people thought from the outside idyllic, you couldn't keep up that perspective of inside and outside anymore? It was sort of had to come a point, like a breaking point. Like.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that trip to Sweden, it actually transpired just a day after the Leinster final. I went over there because my sister lives in Stockholm now since 2013. And maybe I confide in her a bit more than I do with my other two sisters. So the whole reason and rhyme behind that trip was to go over there and tell her everything I was perceived to be hiding. But little did people know I didn't know what I was hiding. And the stark reality of it was I was thinking of dying by suicide over there. And that was the stark reality of the situation. I didn't want to feel that way. I didn't want to think about anything like that, but my head would never get too far away from those thoughts. And I wanted to be a part of something in my life. I wanted to, have a bit of something to do on this earth, but then my mind was taking me elsewhere. So that was definitely at that point in time when I came home. That's the reason why I reached out to Desi Farrell and came home from Stockholm. And I said, look, can I meet you up for a cup of coffee? And the reason why I did was he actually had previous depression and he is also a previous psychiatric nurse. So I was thinking, I'm hoping he's going to give me all the answers that I don't have. And I guess that had kind of started off the point in my life where I could say where my life really did rebuild from there.
Mm. You also, when you mentioned, I suppose with 2014 when you went into St Patrick's Hospital there in Dublin for an 11-week stay, I suppose we won't sugarcoat it. It's quite, comes across quite strong in the book. Like, how did that sort of aid your recovery? Because maybe for some people from the outside looking in, it's, that seems very serious. Obviously it was at the time, but I suppose how did those 11 weeks then get you sort of through that period?
I guess it was a blessing in disguise, and I'm so grateful that I had the contacts there through Desi and the GPA. I'm fully aware that the lucky position that I find myself in to be able to get into an institution such as that, and Brid touched upon there about the psychologists that were available to her on a daily basis. That's what I'm hoping that, in years to come publicly, people will have that kind of access. And, I spent 11 weeks, and as you said, I didn't sugarcoat it in the book, and I would never shy away from the fact it was the most difficult 11 weeks that I've ever faced up to my life. I was facing up to things that I put away for 2 years too long, but it was the first time in my life that I'd kind of realised that I'm not the only one going through this here. I was looking around the hospital from people from 18 years of age to 80 years of age, male and female. We can all go through it, and I kept it within, and the clarity that I got for those 11 weeks was hugely beneficial. I picked up so many tools and resources, coping mechanisms that would allow me to cope after those 11 weeks. And it wasn't as if after the 11 weeks I was all fixed up and I was ready to go. It was just a rebooting of my mind, a new way of thinking, and it was definitely then a new life, I would say, a new lease of life that I never once thought I would have.
Okay, yeah, brilliant. Yeah, that's fantastic. Like, and I suppose say with the setup now with the inter-county playing with the Dubs now, and probably what say Jim Gavin started with this thing of like giving back more, that you're more to the team, like the soup kitchen and volunteering and stuff. Like, again, where does sort of the mental health and the well-being piece come into that with the in the modern day, if you know what I mean, like current setups, like.
Yeah, I guess, Jim has started that mantra of, the person first and then the player. And I think it was so good. We were always, he'd said, one thing that you have to realize is, you want to leave the jersey in a better place than when he first came in the door. And we had to realize the history that, Dublin football has given so many, and the lucky position that we find ourselves in. And I guess from a mental health standpoint of view, or a well-being point of view, is little gestures. I think Brid touched upon those things as well. Just the small things that mean the most to you when you're going through the most difficult times, whether it be through an injury or a mental health discrepancy. It's those little things. And we practice those each and every single day. When you go onto the training field, don't leave that evening not given one piece of, positive kind of feedback, either a tap on the shoulder. And even remember, referring to a story, gone off on a bit of a tangent here, when I went back into Dublin senior setup after the 11 weeks that I'd spent in St. Pat's, and it was Paul Flynn, one of the senior figures on the team, had come over to me and he pat me on the back and he said, "Good to see you back, mate." And that for me was the biggest thing he could have ever done. You know, I'd said it to him years later and he even forgot that, you know, but those are the things that Jim was saying. The smallest of gestures will mean the most to your teammates and player and, you know, management and everyone surrounded around you. So he was just kind of developing on that for what was, you know, the 5 or 6 years that he ended up being with us.
When you say that as well, like, was the acknowledgement more than anything? Like you say there, like they didn't fully have to understand everything you went through, but it was just the acknowledgement.
Yeah, and that was the thing, because my irrational mind was thinking, you know, it was made public. I wasn't aware of, you know, the reaction, you know, from the, I could say, the outside world from St. Pat's, because I deleted all social media. I wasn't interacting with any of the players at all while I was in there. So my irrational mind was thinking, you know, I've just come out of a mental hospital here. People, the stigmatized life that I probably held mental health in, they probably think I'm maybe quote unquote crazy, you know, or what they would think of me. I'll come back into the setup, and it was anything but. You know, and just those little things, maybe intentionally or unintentionally, you know, pat on the back, a little comment here, a little positive kind of feedback, or a little text, a little phone call, all those things were just hugely beneficial into my kind of reintegration back into the team. And then I'd learned that from, you know, I'm only, well, I'm young at 26, I've still a few years left of playing. You know, I'm trying to bring that into now. I see the younger lads kind of coming out at 18, 19, 20 years of age. Those little things that I'd learned upon were hugely beneficial for me integrating back into the team.
Brilliant. And I suppose then, like what I was asking Brid there as well, maybe your top three, Jane, then in terms of like what you find, say, in your routine, or like is it reading, is it different exercise, you know, different headspace away from football? How do you manage that?
Yeah, I think if I was to name maybe a top three, and it comes as no surprise probably as talking is number one. You know, I think, you know, in the middle of fifth year when my journey had begun, you know, I wish, you know, if I had one regret in my story is that I didn't speak up on day one. So no matter how big or small, you know, speak up on day one to someone. And number two, I think kind of apt for these kind of COVID times is a structure to your day. You know, keeping yourself accountable, having things to look forward to, whether it be a bit of physical exercise, you have your non-negotiable in there, you probably don't like it, or, you know, a bit of work 9 to 5, that's your non-negotiable. And then number three is then something to stimulate your mind. Ironically, I only took up a bit of reading during the COVID times, and I was, you know, probably a year into writing a book, and I'd only taken up a bit of reading, but something to stimulate your mind. So those would be my kind of three things, wellbeing tips for people listening in the call. And again, it's very individualistic, but, you know, find what works for you and go after that each and every single day.
Brilliant, yeah. Okay, great. We'll shift gears then to Chris down there in Adelaide. So I suppose, Chris, do you want to give, I suppose, the viewers an idea of what you're working at? Because you obviously had your previous career playing with Antrim, but you're on the other side of the coin now, working with athletes directly. So can you give people an idea of how that sort of works?
Well, the job itself, starting from now, I support athletes in their sort of life outside sport. So career, balancing sport and education, or what they want to do outside sport. So to make sure that their whole identity isn't wrapped up in just being an athlete. And I suppose to go right back to how I got into that was I seen playing for Antrim as the be all and end all as a kid who watched the 1989 hurling final, Antrim Tip, and the guys were, you know, looked upon. I lived at that time in a small town called Ballycastle, and those boys were looked upon as heroes. You know, they were gods, and the saffron jersey became a symbol for me of what I aspired to. But that's what I worked towards. I never really got on school teams or anything until I was like 16, 17. And I always felt like I had to work harder than everyone. And then made county squads, and at 18, I didn't really go to school. So I'm sure Brid would see some people who focus on the school teams and playing for the county is more important than school. And I was one of those people. So I didn't really put an emphasis on my education or my life or the longevity, and, you know, sort of never really took the idea that you couldn't make money out of playing Gaelic football. It was, oh, well, sure, we'll see when I get there. And for me, that when I sort of got an injury and I was told by the surgeon that I wouldn't, that was it, like, you won't play at that level again. It was the end of the world for me. You know, it was like my whole identity was wrapped up in in what I'd done and being an athlete, I suppose. And I'd always got jobs around being able to play for the county. It wasn't the opposite, you know, that it was being able to be good at sport or being able to be sort of an athlete was bigger than my job, which was, you know, it was wrong. It was wrong to look like that. But when it was finished, I struggled. And I know Ciaran was saying, talking about his experiences. And for me, you know, I walked around for a while just a shell of a human being. And for me, not being able to be around the people that I was around since I was 4 years old, you know, there was a core group of friends of mine and we all pushed each other and we all ended up playing county football. And I couldn't bring myself to be around those people anymore because they were, I suppose, doing what I couldn't do. And when I struggled with the operation coming back, I sort of became a different human being, you know, being aggressive, fighting all the time, arguing with my mom, arguing with my brother. I remember one time we had an argument and it was like the straw that broke the camel's back, and it, you know, tried to break the windows in the house and ran from, we were living in a small town called Trolan at the time, which is about 12 miles from Belfast. And I just stuck a tracksuit on and just ran to Belfast. So I'd always sort of escaped. I'd always looked to escape. And there wasn't a culture really in around my club or with the county of support seeking. And I suppose that, like, the culture of not support seeking and not having signposted places to go, I, you know, struggled identity-wise, struggled with mental health. And as Ciaran said, you know, the ideations of wanting to commit suicide. And it wasn't until one day I had an argument with my mum in a car and I just broke down crying. And it happened to be the same day that I, you know, decided to want to commit suicide. And the breaking down and crying in the car just came out of nowhere. It wasn't something that I tend to do. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me because my mum just got around me and I didn't want to seek support because there was no culture of it. So I studied psychology, which probably I should have sought some support alongside of that, and decided that I wanted to support people who would potentially go through these things. I'd done my degree and my master's, and from doing the degree, I didn't really ever think I was academic. I had massive anxiety for the first 2 years of university, thinking that I couldn't, you know, I wasn't made out for this, but the results kept coming and I met someone who gave me a really good piece of advice, and they said, just take the lessons you've learned from sport, take your daily structure. You know, if you get up at 6 in the morning to go and do a gym session or a prehab session, use that time to read 2 research papers, or do a bit of reading around what you're going to do and prepare for your classes. Build in some structure, some exercise in your day. Met some brilliant people, and I know Ciaran McCann's on the call from China. So Ciaran would know Aaron Brannigan, and Aaron Brannigan was really good for me. He's a footballer with Kilcoo, who put some structure around, helped me sort of put some structure around gym training and exercise. I actually done better gym sessions with him than I ever did with the county. For me, that was really purposeful. It gave me a purpose. I found a purpose through the struggle, and to this day, that's been my motivator. You know, that's kept me accountable. I've always enjoyed working in bars and restaurants, so I took that and I wanted to do a job of service, and I love sport. It's all sports, every sport, even like Brid's playing in the AFLW and going to watch AFLW games. Flew up to Melbourne last weekend to watch the AFL, the Anzac game. So getting involved in sport was a big thing for me. I've done a little bit of work in psychology after I did my master's with Kildare Ladies, and then worked a little bit with Eire McNulty in Dublin. And from that, the opportunity came up for Malaysia, Ciaran, and you know yourself, we worked together with the Sports Institute there, and even then, you know, just because you have a purpose, there's things that happen to you, and the house doesn't play the cards that you want sometimes, or you're playing against the house a little bit, and that gave me the mantra of just play the hand you're dealt at any given moment. You know, it wasn't always easy working in the Sports Institute there, But that would probably be one of my pieces of advice too, was I think one of the best communities outside of playing football in Boston was, the social support that was available through the club in KL and around Eire. The crack was unbelievable. Any opportunity I got, any times I was struggling, I would get amongst the boys and the girls, and the club was just fantastic. It's one of the best communities I've ever been involved in. So at times there's always been a little bit of struggle, and I've learned to deal with it, and learned to sort of put things around myself and cope with it a bit better with the transitions.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, it's great to hear, Chris. I think you've given a great sort of synopsis to people of everything that you went through, and that you want to help athletes now. And did you find, like, even you mentioned obviously you were here in Malaysia working with the Olympic athletes, and then you went to Sydney now to work with the Australian cyclists. Did you find pushback then ever when you're sort of coming with a new sort of service, so to speak? Like, everyone knows strength and conditioning, and everyone knows physio and medical, but when you're coming with sports psychology or lifestyle, like, how are you sort of bringing in that conversation?
I suppose it's an emerging field in high performance sport and elite sport. For me, like, when I was coming up through the county, there was the GPA was just forming, and I don't think they'd really got an identity. Where I feel like nowadays there's a strong identity about the GPA, and they do good work. But for me, there's always a little bit of pushback, because athletes want to be athletes. They want to just be out there. They want to be just playing. They want to be training. They want to get those endorphins going, and that is brilliant while it's there. But there's also that loss when it's gone. Those endorphins, and there's something that's not there. So it's using those experiences, and there's a lot more research coming out now of athletes leaving sport. There's a lot of pushback from some athletes who just want to get on with the job. There's some who do really well. I mean, we have one athlete who's a girl who is doing a double degree. She's an ambassador for women's, for the push for more support for women. She's 21 years of age. She made the Australian cycling team through the academy, and 12 months into the Olympics. So those stories really help, of people who actually do it and can manage it. But it's the same as life. If you don't plan, if you just do it ad hoc, it becomes a lot harder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Brilliant. And in terms of like I said to two other guests there, like your sort of top three takeaways, because you're working with athletes day in, day out, like what did you see from high performance sport that translates to any industry that's watching, so to speak?
I think having a goal is massive, or small goals. It's okay to have long-term goals, it's okay to have big goals, but as Brid said, having those small steps that are achievable for yourself, and seeing the pathway, and not really waiting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. You're actually, creating light all along the way. You're building lights in your own tunnel. And yeah, having a goal would be one. I mean, social support is massive. There's a lot of research around resilience and being proactive, but the perception of your social support is really big. Especially, there might be some people on the call who are in Asia and away from family, and there are always elements of making sure that you're getting enough time talking to people, just talking, and having a crack, and reminiscing or talking about whatever, but just getting amongst people is fantastic. And it's a massive component of people being resilient. If you don't know where to go, or you don't know who to talk to, it's very hard to push through something yourself without it having any detriment.
Sorry, Chris, not to cross you, but just picking up on, I think you hit the nail on the head with the relocation piece. Like, there's people on the call from all over, Japan, Hong Kong, all Southeast Asia. In terms of, your journey coming out to Malaysia and then Australia, do you think you overlooked the relocation aspect? Like, how sort of important that is? Like,
I think going to Asia, not so much. When I went to Boston as a 23-year-old to play football for a summer and stayed for 2 years, I overlooked it, just as I took it willy-nilly. I was going over and everyone was white and spoke English, so it would be fine. And I was amongst Irish people, so it's just an extension of home. And you're just doing everything you did at home with a bit more freedom. And yeah, when I went to Asia, it was a bit more planned, because I was going to a country that I didn't know the first language. I didn't know the cultures and the sort of things that go on. It immersed me, I think, and made me appreciate the word and people from a global perspective a lot more. So I did plan for that, and I'd done a lot of research and met a lot of people who had lived in Malaysia and sort of done that stuff before. I was fortunate enough to be in a master's with someone who worked at the National Sports Institute in Malaysia, so I got a bit of support there. So yeah, transitioning to anything is massive, whether it's going from junior to senior, whether it's going from job to job. And I know people around the world do that. You know, if you're an expat, there is the opportunity to jump from one job to another, from one company to another company, and there's different culture, there's different expectations, there's different goals, and your role will be a lot different. Sometimes it's higher and you're in a leadership position or you're over people. So it's just sort of sitting down and working out, you know, what am I going into? You'll never really know everything until you immerse yourself in it. And it's, again, my motto has been for the last sort of 10 years is just play the hand you're dealt. Because you can only, the way I look at it, the reason I use that is it allows me to ground myself and be where I am, not where idealistically where I would like to be. So yeah, just be where your feet are and then move forward and plan from there, because we have to reset a lot, especially in the current pandemic. It's constantly changing, and to know that you constantly have to reset can be uncomfortable, but sometimes you just have to, I suppose, take stock, take awareness of what's actually going on, and then play forward from there. And it's the same in a football game if we're talking about lessons for life. Sometimes the game doesn't go your way, sometimes you make a mistake, but it's the way that I use that phrase, it allows me to reset and just be where my feet are.
Brilliant, yeah. And on that as well, Chris, I'm just curious as well how you see success in your role now. Because, like, for example, many people won't know with the cyclists, like if they're not that interested, but you'll obviously have, you know, the team going to Tokyo for the Olympics in July. So, like, for you, what does success look like for you and for that group?
Well, success for them is all individual. You've got different disciplines that are completely different, like BMX, you've got para, you've got road, you've got track, you've got mountain bike, and they all have different cultures, different beliefs, different goals for themselves. But for me, success in my role is if people don't, if they don't really struggle as much as what predominantly athletes do beyond sport, if they believe that they have the capability to cope with the demands of leaving sport, if they can be aware, they can get education, and they know how to seek support, then that to me is success. And for them to be self-driven, and for the conversations at the end of it to be driven by the athlete. Because at the start, it's very much awareness and education on my side. And then beyond that, it's the athlete drives the conversations. So if they're self-sufficient and they're driving and they're self-regulating, I suppose is the psychological term, then that's success for me. And what I do is I support them for 12 months post, whether they get exited or whether they decide to retire themselves. I support them for 12 months along that transition to make sure that they're supporting themselves for the rest of their life. But they can always come back. It's not just a 12 months on paper. So short answer is success is self-regulation.
Okay, fantastic. That's brilliant, Chris. Brid, just jumping back over to you there, if we could. Something Chris brought up, and I made a note before this. We had some sort of a couple of pre-submitted questions. The whole thing of like women in sport and like how much Gaelic football has grown at home now. You know, 50,000 and All Ireland now is, you know, one of the highest attendances, if not in Europe, for women's sport, and where the game has come from or come to with Aussie rules since 2017. Where do you see that going, or like how is that positively developing? Like,
where do I see the Aussie rules going, is it?
Yeah,
Like
so yeah, obviously you're there with the Aussie rules, and it's grown massively in the last 4 or 5
Yeah.
years.
Yeah, oh, like it's going from strength to strength. Like next year, there's going to, it's a 10-week season, and it's just going to keep progressing. So I suppose from an Irish viewpoint, there's probably going to have to be a lot more hard conversations down the line in terms of if you go, it's, you know, hopefully if GAA goes back to normal, you know, in the coming years, you're eating into a lot of league time, potentially into championship time. So, you know, it means that players will potentially maybe have to choose between the two. But here, it's very much in its infancy. This is only its 5th year in the AFLW, and the amount of coverage and investment that has been put into it here, it's very, very easy to be you know, a female athlete in Australia. There's so many opportunities, and I suppose given that I'm in the AFLW, I just see it immensely here. Like that, the amount of resources that they have at their fingertips is just unbelievable. The facilities, everything, like even going back now to the psychology and the psychologist availability, everything is at your fingertips. At home, I suppose home is what I absolutely love, and it's what I've known all my life, and I take huge pride in that. Maybe, yeah, we don't have the same resources that the Australians have, but, you know, by God, we've absolutely, like, such pride in where we come from, and such determination and grit, and always kind of like, you're always, yeah, maybe you're pushing against the wheel a little bit all the time, because you're out to prove, you know, that you should be where you are at the moment. Yeah, like I suppose women's football at home has progressed massively, and yes, the 50,000 numbers are absolutely huge. But still, if you look at it in the grander scheme of things, that 50,000 is only still on All-Ireland final day. So I still think that there's a massive scope still for ladies football at home. They have improved it in trying to, you know, bring the semi-finals to Cork Park the last 2 years, which was a massive step forward. But that continuity, you know, that needs to be seen for the next couple of years. People need to see that there is a you know, I suppose a pathway that I can play in Cork Park if, you know, if we keep pushing and driving. But like, I go back to even a couple of years ago when I was playing, you know, in a Munster final, there might have only been, you know, 100, 200 people at it. So there's still massive scope for ladies football. They are doing the world work. And I suppose, look, maybe controversial enough, I definitely think the ladies football needs to come under the GAA umbrella. I think it's the only way forward. Ladies football don't own any assets, bar maybe 2 or 3 counties that have their own grounds. So until you see that progression, you know, I think ladies football still has a little bit of a way to go. And then you look here and you see the AFLW under the AFL, and the amount of facilities, the amount of resources, the amount of opportunities that they have. This sport is going to absolutely explode here. Give this another 10 years and it is just going to be a massive sport for women in Australia.
It looks that well, Brid, to be fair. Yeah, that's fantastic. And Shane, maybe just when we were talking about home, just to jump back over to you, because I suppose you're on the ground, so to speak. You know, coming out of the COVID restrictions now, and you're coming up to National League and stuff, like, how does that look now in terms of the next couple of months and going into the championship?
Yeah, I suppose it's a revamped look of the National League. It's very much, we've 3 games and hopefully what will be a semi-final and a final in the league, and then a run up to championship, a very quick run off of that. And to be fair, I think it's a new look that a lot of players like. I think as players, all we want to do is play football. You know, not that the older kind of style of championship was anything wrong with it, but you know, there has been a couple of tweaks that I think a lot of lads kind of preferred last year in particular. You know, week after week, game after game, and that's what we as players, you know, we train all the time. You know, we've been training the last year in our own for the most part, and you know, we're just dying to get out on the pitch and do it that way. So look, it's National League first. Get our feet in the ground with that. Get ourselves kind of ready for the championship then, and see where we go from there.
Brilliant. Very good. Okay, and just conscious of time, we're nearly sort of out of time. But Chris, maybe just to finish up with you with you know, a couple of, I suppose, takeaways. You know, with the cyclists now, we're talking going towards Tokyo. Is there any other successes you've seen the athletes come to you with, or a big thing, and we've worked on this before, is the post transition, and they don't just see themselves as an athlete. So for people watching, obviously, we've doctors and we've a lot of international school teachers and stuff. What again would be your final takeaways, I suppose, just to sum us up?
Do you mean just with the post-Olympic transition,
Yeah, I suppose the reason I asked that was when we were talking about the COVID is something massive like that. Yeah, a lot of athletes you will see retiring after the Olympics and stuff like that, and there could be a lot of, again, relocations. That I suppose the buzzword from this evening as well. People move back home or around Asia or around the world. So what do you see as the best things in that area? Best sort of takeaways to help people.
Well, for me, the big thing is with anything that involves a lot of work or is going to involve resilience or some sort of demand that you have to cope with. The pre-planning is something that I do, and it's something that the psychologist does with the team, where we work sort of in collaboration with the psychologist would work on the emotional side of the transition. And then I would work on sort of the identity side of what are you working on outside of being an athlete. And for me, it's there's three parts to it, which comes into the whole COVID stuff as well, which is the first part of just acceptance and taking stock of how things are, having a decompression, and then plotting a route forward. So we do plan for that. We do have athletes sort of, what's the best word to use? We have them take a leadership role in their own. And when you give someone ownership, what Brid said previously, you give people ownership of their own journey, then they build more confidence that they can actually do it. So for a lot of people and a lot of athletes, and especially staff too, it affects staff. There's a lot involved in this Olympics, with logistics and quarantines and people being away from their families for long periods of time. So it's accepting it, decompressing from it, and then planning what you can plan or taking ownership of it. And then you've got the support around you. And as Brid said, there's a lot of support here for a lot of athletes in Australia. It's incredible. It really is incredible. Even for staff, I use the AIS Mental Health Referral Network at times when things are really stressful, not because I'm really struggling, but because I don't want to struggle in the future. So just having resources that you can use.
Yeah, brilliant. I suppose, we'll probably leave it on that positive note if we can. So thank you everyone for tuning in. It's the first one of these we've done, to Joe with the county board, Pat with Eire GAA, to Shane, Chris and Brid, myself, Ciaran, delighted that we were able to do it. So we'll leave it there, and have a good evening. Thank you very much.
Cheers all.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.